Have you ever experienced a moment that felt oddly familiar, or not, but somehow significant, as though you were meant to experience that feeling in whatever place you were in, while talking to whomever you were, or even sometimes in solace? Whatever the case may be, in that specific moment in time. If so, you are not alone, which is probably why so many people have contemplated the meaning of those moments, as well as some other ones often referred to as déjà vu. Well, there are many theories surrounding that very topic, one of which I would like to explore with you all in today's episode. Welcome back to Going 5D with Destiny Dawn. I'm your host, Destiny Dawn. Last week, we discussed my journey of discovery as it relates to extra-dimensional beings. And as promised, I wanted to talk next time about dimensions, densities, and time, since it only makes sense to me in order to explain why many of us do not perceive such things as ghosts, demons, elementals, and the like. Which is why I decided to call this week's episode Consciousness. For far too long, we have been conditioned to believe it has something to do with being good, or bad, or weak, or strong, or even crazy, when in reality, it is my opinion that it has nothing to do with any of those things. Instead, simply a matter of perspective, in more ways than one. Imagine a new kind of game comes out. It allows you to play in a fully immersive environment, where you can experience and explore an expansive virtual world from within a suit that the user would wear. The suit itself being so sophisticated that, similar to the controls gamers currently use, the user would be able to see and interact with their surroundings within the game, even receiving biofeedback similar to the DualShock system of today's current game controllers. Another similarity is in how the game changes as the user gains more experience. But rather than having to complete specific quests, the experience obtained can be done by doing anything. The only differentiation being that each different type of experience pointing the user in different directions or paths within the game. Of course, players soon discover that the more experience gained, the more the game changes, and the more expansive it becomes in its own unique way. Level by level, each adding different color palettes to the game, and over time, even the visuals become crisper and clearer. Other sets of puzzles unlock, other bonus areas on the map that can't be opened up any other way become open and available. And the players who didn't notice or seem to mind in the first place might not go out of their way to do it, but often eventually stumble upon these bonus aspects in one way or another, just more infrequently than their counterparts who've explored and shared their findings, maybe going online to Quora or Reddit or whatever gamer websites they choose, making it easier for those who read about or hear about or watch them do it and learn these other aspects of the game. Seeking them out after, learning about them online. Well, some never bothering, choosing instead just to simply enjoy the game. Takes all types, right? Well, according to physics, that reality and the one that we currently reside in are not so different. As strange as that sounds, theories related to dimensions, densities, and timelines have been taken scientists down a series of rabbit holes that nobody could have expected to even go down until just recently, save for historical oddballs, often thought to be heretics such as Galileo, when he insisted that the Earth and other planets revolved around the sun, which was very controversial at the time. Now, how does that or déjà vu relate to time, dimensions, or densities, you might be wondering? Well, let's examine what we know about dimensions. Anyone who's taken 10th grade science or played video game probably understands that up and down is one dimension, side to side another, with the addition of front to back creating a third dimensional cube. But let's stop there for a moment. Imagine seeing those lines from a first-person perspective. Imagine that you can only go in one direction and then backwards. You can't turn around, you can't look side to side. You can only go front and back, that's it. Then add in front to back, side to side. You can go front to backwards, as well as up and down, basically, and backwards once again. The addition of the third dimension would be pretty amazing at that point, right? Well, imagine if one day you discovered the existence of other cubes all around you. That is what I would consider to be the fourth dimension, the awareness of the existence of other cubes. Perhaps because they intersected at just the right point, at just the right time. Another way to see that is the ability to briefly either see through a perfectly lined up perspective to another side, or to step out of your dimensional view to view them from a broader perspective. From there, being able to travel into others briefly would be fifth dimension. And that is what I believe is happening at times, or at least possible when people learn a technique referred to as astral projection, which is an advanced form of meditation whereby the individual is able to see themselves and their surroundings from a perspective outside of the physical body. Some people fear that doing so would result in possible separation between the soul and the body, but it wouldn't be until one reached the sixth dimension, having died, usually, that this would be the only time a person would be permanently separated from the body, since there is always a cord attaching the two, which is not able to be severed until the body dies. So while I know it is possible for someone to see and go to the sixth dimension from their body, they can't be sixth density until they reach their bodies, but we'll get there in a moment. At that point, they would be able to come and go to all of them, since the sixth dimension is when we cease to take physical form. Now, in the seventh dimension, one is no longer an individuated consciousness anymore, able to see all dimensions if they so choose. They can even visit multiple dimensions at the same time. In that dimension, all beings from all lower dimensions are overlapping and apparent to one another, since that's our true state. But our physical body prohibits us from perceiving this, at least without working our way up to the fifth dimension, which cannot be obtained until reaching the fifth density. But we'll get to that again. In the seventh dimension, we can exist as an individuated consciousness if we choose, but usually belong to a hive mind, sort of, where we can, should we choose, tap into the collective consciousness and information collected in the past, present, and future of all beings. The time doesn't really exist in that way, the way that I just described, at least not in a linear sense. It's just more of a collective of information. This is the soul level of a planetary consciousness. In our case, it would be called the Earth Collective. This and higher dimensions is where we and our guides hail from, dropping down into lower dimensions and densities in order to incarnate. I can't remember where, but I do remember hearing somewhere that Earth is said to be seventh dimension. That's where it holds its frequency at. It's capable of higher than seventh density, but I'm getting to density soon. I just want you to kind of keep that in mind. Just planting my seed. The eighth dimension is similar to the fourth, just in that there's a connection between it and the collective consciousness elsewhere in the universe, some going between the two. Up until this point, these dimensions all occupied the same exact space as you're in right now. But in the ninth dimension is where things start to get complicated. I believe the ninth dimension is where a being can go from being in one planetary collective consciousness to another, even going back and forth or fractalized, so they are split evenly between two or more places at any given time. The 10th dimension consists of other universes, but that's as far as I know, even as far as I've been able to study. Though if logic follows, I assume that in the 11th, one would be able to traverse between all of them, and 12 would be, you might say, creator mode, where the collective super being of a consciousness would be capable of creating a new universe altogether. Now, densities work alongside dimensions and within each dimension, but on a more of a gradient. The way that I describe these has been kind of rigid in a certain sense, but there's more of a gradient. One does not simply tend to perceive other realities just in an instant. I mean, it can happen and does from time to time, I believe. But in a general sense, this takes steps, usually many, that lead an individual from one dimension or the awareness of one dimension to another. Now, in the first density, we talked about what a first dimension is, right? Up and down, or side to side, not both. Now, in the first density, though, one knows they exist, but generally do not have the ability to explore their surroundings. A good example of this would be a tree or a rock. That would be first density. While it perceives information coming from all directions, which I believe it is telepathic, so it is aware of the world existence around it, its physical being can't really explore it. These beings are usually, pretty quiet and pretty sedentary, at least by our standards. Though we know scientifically that, especially with plant life, definitely can communicate with one another. An interesting Google search that I would suggest would be to look up a scientist named Gagliano out of Australia, who actually proved plants can even be conditioned using fans and even sound in order to point roots towards where they believe water to be. It's actually pretty badass. I definitely suggest checking that out. In the second density, one knows that they are alive, but generally do not question their existence or that of another. Room for expansion is limited to what is needed for one to survive. Most animals fall within this category. Now, that's not to say a tree or a cat might not be able to perceive even more than a human. Like I said, telepathy. It is actually well established that they do to a certain degree, but you'll have to look at Google for that one too, since we only have so much time. But it is what they choose to do with that information and existence that sets them apart. For example, according to books written by Dolores Cannon, such as 3 Waves of Volunteers, many people coming from other planets first incarnate as something very easy and spend time just getting used to being in physical form before coming into their current life. By that logic, I bet there are some who happily live as a tree or a rock between incarnations too. Seems pretty peaceful, actually. That which distinguishes us, those residing in the third density, is the ability to conceptualize, analyze, and the ever-favorite overthink. Similar to fourth dimension, the ability to conceive of complex concepts beyond what you can see, think, and physically feel takes you into high third and on into fourth density. To move through it, one must be able to transcend their body, which is why people who are astral projecting do not realize it, but are actually living in the fourth and even fifth densities, and probably dimensions as well, as mentioned earlier. because I didn't want to distract from the point of the dimensions. I didn't want to go into it all at that point. But the 6th dimension is where we go to before and after every incarnation, as that is the first level where there is no physical form. By that time, one is high 5th density. They are evolving past the need for physical form. Obviously, I don't know the specifics on that because I haven't been there yet. Being quite dense myself, obviously. But it is my belief that this is a journey both Buddha and Jesus set out upon, perhaps themselves ascending to that point. 7th density consisting of the Earth Collective. This is where one returns back to in the Earth Collective consciousness, but still able to differentiate themselves and their own individual consciousness at any time. Once an individual dies, there's a sort of decompression period where the being acclimates to being without a body once again, and that's why they stay in 6th for a little while also working through any cellular trauma and healing that needs to be addressed. From my understanding, this can take anywhere from a few months to a few years, sometimes even longer. Once this is completed is when the soul rejoins the collective, bringing with it the newest experiences and wisdom gained from that most recent incarnation. Souls moving into the 8th density do so in order to focus on something generally within a smaller group with others. Again, I can't say for sure, but based upon the research that I've done in my own inclinations, my own meditations, that's kind of where I've been led. Following my understanding of dimensions, it seems logical to assume that it would be to assist in areas that need additional support from the collective consciousness by breaking off into specialties. Some go back into human incarnations, but this can be said for just about any level. Although I would think once you get above 10, that they probably are needed more elsewhere. I've heard channels describing higher levels coming back down, for example, to occupy vessels that required the individual to die very young or in a very awful or tragic way. Apparently, these spots are less desirable and they can easily create karma that might be difficult to overcome just in a single lifetime or two. So I guess that kind of makes sense. I once heard that the earth itself, like I said, supports a collective consciousness of 7th density. And that really did ping with me, leading me to believe that the ones higher than that are not exclusive to this planet. Thus, I believe most who incarnate on earth come from 7th density, with the exception of those who have come to assist during this time. Those known as star seeds, light workers, indigo children, rainbow children, crystal children. There are a lot of them. So whatever you choose, whatever name you choose to use, I've heard it said by many channels as well as written in such books as the Dolores Cannon ones, that those who tragically enter ending incarnations, those beings take those difficult jobs that nobody else wants, that they do so out of love and the desire to help in offering their own unique specialties, although they usually forget them once they are born, so it becomes a challenge. Basically, 10th, 11th, and 12th densities are just next level beings and rarely exist alone. Instead, it's part of more of a collective at any given time. I believe that these are like next level creator healers who protect and plan eons ahead of the rest of us. While we're all over here playing 5D chess at best, they live completely outside of time. Which leads me to the last component of our discussion today, bringing us full circle back to where we started. Imagine Your virtual reality suit for the aforementioned game has a built-in mechanism that can recharge itself with proper use and will continue to do so until its expiration date, a shelf life of sorts. Your body is very similar in that way and tends to last a specified period of time within a general range, 70 to 100 years usually, depending on how it's coded and how well it's cared for. You can think of this as your personal matrix. This is where time comes in. According to Einstein, time is relative to the reference frame of the observer, and I believe this. We use time on this plane of existence, in the reality in which we currently reside, as one of the Earth collective incarnations. Time is merely a reference point in which we can categorize, track, and reference back to a later time. But outside of the physical reality that we currently reside, there's no such thing as time. If that wasn't mind-bending enough for you, just wait. I'm not even close to finish yet. Given everything that we have discussed today, imagine that you are God, a singular being that has many individuated experiences but thirsts for more. Imagine one experience caused you to want to go back to a different point in time, quote unquote, where only that point could give you that experience that you want to have. You are currently having, maybe several other lifetimes or more, and are maybe close to finishing a different one. So you reach into another direction and begin planning out your next adventure. This is your higher consciousness, existing outside of time, likely from 7th dimension or 7th density or beyond, from where you watch all of the various aspects of yourself living out the experiences that you choose. Rather than a sequence of events that occurs at various points in time, you do not view them as a timeline and reference points instead, with you sitting at the center and looking at each of these lifetimes from the same vantage point, with each being of equal distance from you. And unlike the linear path that we think of that time has moved through, this only exists in the third dimension, from a third dimensional perspective, just as the line forward and backward existed to the one-dimensional being. A single individuated consciousness could have anywhere from a few to thousands of lifetimes. But unlike popular belief, there really is no such thing as past lives, past, present, or future at all for that matter, since in reality, they are all occurring at the same time. You might have only so many going at any given time and might change that, but the point of reference that you use isn't linear. Now, imagine that you go into a deep trance and that you asked your higher self to show you something from another life that you have lived, or you somehow crossed paths with it. Somehow, maybe perhaps because something that they had or were experiencing would be of importance to you in this incarnation. If that wasn't enough, I have one more layer to complicate matters a bit further. As previously discussed, there are beings here to assist that are still living out lives wherever they came. These individuals are usually completely unaware of this and have often found themselves in similar situations, resulting in what I can only assume would be very confusing, and if both were to bump into each other or somehow overlap. Imagine that. You come from somewhere else, you're birthed into this consciousness, and therefore you don't remember who you really are. And then you bump into another version of yourself living in perhaps a different world or a different dimension or different time. Imagine how crazy that would be. Now, I've also heard that or read that when we have a point in time where we make a decision to do or not to do something, that oftentimes another reality is created where we did or didn't do that thing. And that just adds yet another layer. because we can bump into those too. And I think those are all examples of what we experience and perceive to be deja vu. Deja vu can also be where that is brought into our awareness on purpose, where we're pinged in a certain moment to either see into something else, a different lifetime perhaps, a different time, space, reality, either to give us information or to let us know that we are exactly where we need to be at that moment in time. It's kind of like our own little affirmation. Between this and our discussion about extra-dimensional beings coming here, with or without bodies, you may be wondering why anyone would start a podcast with such controversial and difficult topics for many to understand, much less appreciate. But my hope is that you will take this information and roll with it, either because you're skeptical and think I'm full of shit, or like a seed that I presented to you with concepts that might intrigue you, leading to other concepts that will lead you to others, and so on. Empowering you to not only question your reality, but to know how to question your reality, and thus how to play the game. I'll get to that more in a minute. Have you ever heard the one about the blind man and the elephant, even describing it very differently, as one felt his trunk and described it as a snake, one feeling his side and describing it as a wall, one feeling his leg and describing it as a tree, and one feeling his leg and describing it as rope? We all have very unique perspectives, based upon our own perspectives in the journey leading up to that moment. As I had first asked in the introduction episode, what if we are simply here to experience as much as we can, while learning a series of lessons that cannot be learned any other way? After everything that we've discussed, if we add in astrology as another layer, but see it as coordinates instead for a point in time, paired with a body capable of accomplishing all the things that we want to do and learn in a single incarnation, that can change our perspective very much. See, our existence from these new perspectives can change how we think about who we are and what we are capable of. That's what I want for you. No longer to be confined by the conditioning that we've been taught during our upbringing. I believe that this physical reality and the physical vessel that we drive around in throughout them is not dissimilar to the analogy I used about a virtual reality at the beginning of this episode. Seeing things from that higher perspective can and should help us see our bodies in a whole new way, our existence in a whole new way, since knowing this can help us better understand and care for them. While yes, genetics are always a factor, I believe that can be seen as coding. I believe we know at a subconscious level how long we intend to be here and care for our bodysuits accordingly. Personally, I am a foodie. I've known since I was very young that I would live to be old, or at least I assumed that because I had a dream of dying as a very old lady. I think we can change course if we decided we wanted to have additional experiences that were maybe not part of the initial plan, but that we create many exit points for throughout our lives in the same way in order to escape if we feel like we're not learning the lessons we came here to learn, or at least went a different direction that led us away, now no longer being on pace to. I think this is why our guides and what we would consider to be guardian angels follow us around to help keep us on track. They are oftentimes friends or acquaintances from other existences. And they're not here to give us like answers or fix our problems, and generally stay out of our drama, but do try getting our attention through synchronicities, or sometimes just shouting until we listen. They help our oversoul in assuring that the karmic lessons are noticed and experienced over and over until we learn those lessons. And when they are needed to perform miracles, quote unquote, to help keep us alive when it is not yet our time to move on. As a mostly blind individual that has had a job since I was 13, I think I've led a pretty normal life. I could have settled for Social Security and lived a boring existence, but I wanted more. And I knew I had extra help. I know it because I can feel it. For someone with my condition and visual impairments, the odds of me never breaking a bone or getting seriously ill have to be astronomical. If that weren't enough, add to that I have been driving almost daily for over 30 years. And the only major accident that I was ever in was when I was 18, sitting in the back seat of a Beretta being driven by someone I should not have been riding with because they had been drinking. Tells me a lot. Sitting to the left of me in the rear driver's seat was an open toolbox. I never even thought about closing until we went off the road and into a ditch at high speed. The car immediately toppled over, spinning then several times before coming to a stop about 20 feet from the road. The entire T-top was crushed, yet I managed to squeeze out the front driver's seat window, climbing over tools that had gone everywhere. I knew then that someone was there with me, protecting me. Walking away with only minor bruising, and only on the right side of my body, which had slammed up against the car from the inside. It was as if something just completely blocked my left side, preventing me from being struck by the tools that just went flying everywhere as the box itself came crashing down beside me. Paramedics were shocked. Fast forward several years later, and I'd offered to take several friends home from work when it had begun storming. Too broke to afford to fix a problem with my windshield wipers, I nervously dropped off a couple of guys at a place about 15 minutes from work and another friend on my way home. I remember one of them had commented, "It's pouring down rain, thundering and lightning, and I'm being driven by a mostly blind lady. I feel great about this. I don't know whether to feel safer inside or chancing it by walking home." And as I peered through this one good visible area of my Rain-X-soaked windshield, I blurted out the very first thing that popped in my head. There is no safer place on earth than right here, right now. I felt very confident for whatever reason and just smiled back at my horrified-looking friend sitting beside me. There are simply some things that we just know, which is why this will resonate with some of you, but maybe not all. Striking thoughts and memories I can't even conceive of. Yet I know this somehow because of my experience and how it often happened. I have found that in most cases, people do not like the things that fall outside of accepted beliefs. Yet a good number of people have come back to me later and thanked me for saying that. I am encouraged for that reason to keep saying what I know to be the truth, what makes sense and resonates with me. Before wrapping up today, there's something else I wanted to go over, something I think is important to understand. Based on everything else in store going forward, which is a concept known as the laws of the universe. Tenets known by many names that existed long before Earth, or most planets, were created. These laws were created for the physical being to experience its existence free from interruption or influence. The first rule is the law of attraction, which states that a being attracts energy like itself. Then there's the law of polarity, which states that everything in existence has an opposite, a duality, if you will. The law of rhythm, which states that cycles are a natural part of the universe, just like seasons. The rule or the law of relativity, which states that we all see reality in our own way, from our own unique perspective, including truth. The law of cause and effect, which states that for every cause, there is an effect. Thinking is the cause, and experience is the effect. Correspondence, which states that your external reality is a reflection of your internal state. Then there's perpetual transmutation of energy, This is the only one I'm really going to go into because I'm going to talk more about these at length later. But I feel like this one kind of really goes along most with this episode, which states that energy is constantly in motion, and that which is not already existing in physical form can be transmuted. Now, this works differently depending on the dimension one is in, but within the reality shared by the Earth collective consciousness, nothing that would defy the agreed upon rules or terms can be changed if it would be seen, witnessed, or experienced by others beyond the person wishing to change it, unless it serves the best interests of the collective. But those cases are rare and generally determined at a level well above third density or dimension. An example of this would be cases where eyewitnesses have observed the presence of beings outside of their dimension or density, like en masse, where perhaps the veil is thinner on our side and we can briefly observe the existence of beings living alongside us. Examples are emergency interference, such as the Fukushima nuclear incident, where thousands of citizens observed what appeared to be ships appearing from thin air. That's a good Google search. Or ghosts or extra-dimensionals. Beings aware of this use this as a loophole at times in order to alter another user's experience, to manipulate them, for example, into believing that their reality is different than it really is, such as religion or using fear tactics. And this is why people get trapped in this dimension after death, rather than, say, crossing over into the sixth dimension. I believe that's why ghosts get stuck here, instead of going where they should be. They get trapped here because either they're scared, they don't realize they died, or their religion has convinced them that they don't deserve to move on to heaven. Their religion has taught for them that what is waiting beyond the light may be terrifying, or that they could go to hell and their soul living in damnation for all the time. Similarly, other examples include instances where unsuspecting individuals are tricked by opportunistic entities, seeking to scare them away or even worse, feed on them. Such as I believe was the case with the man that I had helped, which I talked about in the previous episodes. In that situation, it eventually became clear to me that that entity had been feeding off of him, which has been known to lead to dire situations, including energy drain, possession, or even death. This was also the reason I believe it attempted to scare me away by hurting my child. While I had already been empowered, it couldn't really mess with me. And since sharing this information with my friends and family, they hadn't been attacked either, despite my facing some pretty dark places and situations. Now, it'll make more sense later on as I discuss the laws of the universe, why I talked about that first here. But I really wanted to go into that last one because I think that is empowering for you to know. Life is not as simple as we see. Quantum physics proved that long ago. Knowing that allows us to think outside the box and to take more control of our current reality. Now that I have presented to you my understanding, my experiences, and my beliefs as a result, now we can truly have some fun together. Not only will you be able to better understand what I'm talking about, but you can use this information to better play the game, especially if you think of this physical reality as a school, karma as the lessons you came to learn and experience, and then combine it all from a broader perspective. Then you can think of it all like a game. Ever heard the expression playing 5D chess, for example? Well, my hope is that after sharing this information, I have empowered at least some of you with the tools you need to see your reality from a whole new perspective. And I know that some of you already are, after watching some of the stuff or reading some of the things I recommended in the last episode. That's the key, knowing. Like they used to say in G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle. Seriously, knowing this, now you can play too, the way that you want. Just remember, knowledge and perspective are everything, and the key to taking control of your virtual reality game. According to research completed by Dr. Joe Dispenza, this is not only possible, but something that anyone can do, proven through his research, which demonstrates people all over the world are doing so through the practice of meditation, which is actually not too far removed from those who have studied Ayurveda and Kundalini and what they would tell you. It's all about your internal clock, your internal perspective, and what you can do with the power of the mind. Your mind is a powerful thing. According to Reiki, an ancient healing tool used by practitioners and masters, which I believe are also the same as the laying of the hands as demonstrated by Jesus, according to the Christian Bible, and practiced in modern day by Mormons, it's believed that one can harness energy and even direct it inward or outward to relax and heal. Imagine being able to do that in your reality. Call it whatever you like, but this practice has been used by many for thousands of years. Not surprising, considered that most drug trials have demonstrated efficacy in what doctors refer to as the placebo effect. Many participants have seen success in treatment simply because they believed that they were being cured. Next time, I'll go more in depth about that, and in regard to this and other healing as it applies to our body through the practice of meditation, mindfulness, and balance. We will explore how we can have a better relationship with ourselves, what self-love really means, and how we can connect with our higher selves, healing ourselves and others, and even reprogramming ourselves. We will also touch on shadow work, replacing our past self with a new, better, more empowered version of ourselves as we continue stepping into the enlightened, aware, and best version of who we want to be. In the spirit of the next episode, and as requested, I will also be releasing a meditation that you can use to help clear your chakras. Once we have talked about what those, our auras, frequency, vibrations, all mean and how they can be affected by such healing, as well as other healing modalities such as sound baths, nature, our diet, and more, I think it'll help shed a lot of light on how to go forward for a lot of you. Thank you so much for joining me again today. Love to you all. Until next time.